Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are safe and well. This is Christina Osborne with ISO Stakeholder Affairs. I'm going to be facilitating the web conference today. This conference is part 2 of the Automated Dispatch System, also known as ADS replacement training. The materials, we did post the presentation just before the call. It is out on the Learning Center, which is located under the Participants tab on ISO's website. We are also recording the session today, and we will make that recording available on that same page, the Learning Center page. On the line, I have Gina Wanzer. She's from our Customer Readiness Group. She's actually going to be the leading the training today. And also, Rochelle Wilcius is from Customer Readiness. She's also on the line. She's there to support Gina if there are any questions. So what we'll do, there's about 30 slides that we're going to go through, but we do plan, we will be pausing kind of throughout the training to take questions. You can either ask your question verbally or feel free to send it via chat to the panelists, and we will read the question out loud. So it's whatever you feel more comfortable with. We just ask that you identify yourself before asking your question, and I'll be able to tell who, if you send it via chat, I'll be able to tell who submitted it. But if you do ask your question verbally, please make sure you identify yourself first. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Gina.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Today I'll be talking about the automated dispatch system, the replacement, and this is part 2 of a 2-part training, if you will. So hopefully most of you were able to either listen in on the last one, the part 1 training back in June, or at least listen in on the recording of that. So in that one, we'll kind of review what we covered in that really quickly, and then we'll talk about what we're going to talk about today. As Christina mentioned, feel free to send your questions into the chat, but we will be pausing throughout the deck today to ask the questions as well. So if you're more of a verbal question, we're more than happy to take those as well. So with that, let's get started. So first, let's make sure you're in the right place today. And I was actually going to do a poll. I kind of forgot I was going to do that poll, and I was going to ask you, what's your experience with ADS? If you're sitting in this training, I recommend that you have some experience with ADS so you understand some of the things I'm talking about, as well as some experience with the market in terms of interacting with what you're getting in ADS. But just to talk a little bit about what the automated dispatch system is, in terms of the UI, it's used to view market dispatch instructions, which are given by the real-time market. So you can view things like dispatch operating targets, or DOTs. You'll view things like commitment instructions, which include startups, shutdowns, and transitions for those of you who have resources that might be transitioning between configurations, as well as ancillary services. So if you're getting awards related to ancillary services like non-spin or spin or regulation, you can also view that in ADS. There are certain messages that come throughout. For example, if CAISO is in a contingency, or if there's going to be maintenance on the application, and then viewing historical data related to some of these items. Now, if this doesn't sound familiar to you, you're more than welcome to listen in, but I just want to make sure you know if you're in the right place or not. So today, we will be talking about the change to the ADS system. So previously in the part 1 training, we talked about what I'm calling like the core ADS replacement. We talked about what are you going to see in the new UI versus what you're seeing in the current UI today. So today you're using the ADS Delphi-based client, and we're moving into a web SDK version. So we reviewed that look and feel. And we, again, talked about what changes between going from the current one to the new one. Now, as far as the BRS went, or the requirements, we covered the new look and feel. We covered some of what the changes related to the messages, like how to query the messages and what that new enhanced visibility looks like, so the pop-up of the white message. And we also talked about what the query tool is going to look like in the new UI and some of the templates associated with that. We also talked about access, so that was actually covered in a couple different ways. Managing the access to the data, so for the data retention, this is in particular, we just touched on the reduced amount of data retention, and we also touched on that in the ADS CPG, and there's still more information, it sounds like, to come on that. In terms of the access controls and how you're accessing the new ADS, we talked about the control lists and working with your UAA to make sure that you have the right type of access that's needed moving forward. There was also a provisioning access review for this on June 1st, so that is also available, and the link is provided later on in this presentation for reference if needed. So that's what we covered last time in part 1. So again, today will be part 2. And just before I jump into that, and I apologize here. So before I jump into that, I did see something in the chat. Let me just make sure. Does this change to the part? So I did get a question in the chat that asked they missed part 1 training. Does that change affect the web services interface version 7? So the version 7 will still work when we do the ADS replacement. There is backwards compatibility. However, keep in mind the changes we're actually going to be talking about today will be part of version 8. So if you're planning to use some of the features that we introduced today, then you will maybe need to look at version 8. But part 1 primarily, the part 1 training itself primarily focused on the UI. So if you're primarily API and curious about changes to the API, I would look at the May TUG, I think it was May 26th, which I have a link in the presentation for this today as well. And then I would go listen to the CPG that they covered last week also. But again, the changes we cover today in relation to the UI and just general changes, those will be part of version 8. Okay? So to review just the look and feel, we just glanced through this initial look, and we had the batch status. So it looks very similar to what you're looking at today. We had the batch status. We also had the message bar, but we did have a little bit of a change of the navigation bar going from at the top to some options in the middle here, or on the upper right, sorry. So you have some options now to, query the messages. You'll have your query tool, and then how you're going to set up your profiles or alarms. And then the resource data grid, we did a quick glance at that. You had the trajectory plot, and then your instruction details grid. So just kind of review that look and feel of ADS. So today we're going to talk about, second here. So today we're going to talk about, we're going to review the planned timeline. So now we have a little more detail as it relates to the timeline with the ADS replacement and what's coming in terms of phasing. And then we're going to talk about the changes which are going to be implemented in the fall here coming up, and we're trying to prepare you for Market Sim. So Market Simulation is starting on the 27th, which is in a couple weeks here, and the kickoff call is on the 23rd, which is next week. So I just want to make sure to flag that out, because Market Simulation is going to be the opportunity to test those connections, test your provisioning of access to make sure if you changed any ACL groups, that those are working as expected, things like that. So if you're joining in on Market Simulation, which I encourage you to do, keep in mind the kickoff call is next week and Market Simulation is on the 27th. You're going to see a theme, because I'm going to touch on this a couple times, because I want to make sure you remember that. I did get a couple questions in the chat. Let me stop here for a second. If the current digital, we'll talk about certificates here, so I'm actually going to come back to your question there. And then I got another question, is it too late to join market simulation? I believe the request to participate was a couple weeks ago, but let's come back to that and we'll touch base with our market simulation person to see if anybody is able to join late. And that might just be for the structured scenarios. So let's touch back on that. Okay, so we'll be covering changes today which are going to be applied in the new ADS UI and or the API. I'm not going to specifically talk about too much about specifics to the API, but I can tell you which things are going to be supported in the version 8 API as opposed to version 7 or version 6. And then if you have questions about the technical specs or need more information on that, then I recommend you visit the developer site or developer.kaiso.com. Okay. So today we're going to be covering in terms of the business requirements, we'll be covering the flex ramp modifications, the changes that are coming with the non-spin economic dispatch, unannounced AS testing, managing exceptional ED instructions, some changes that are just column changes for the DOT and SEP values and how to manage those, and then managing the DOT value acceptance or variation. So I know many people are also very interested in the operating instruction and follow DOT flags per the DOTT project or dispatch operating target tariff clarification. So try to say that one 6 times. So I know a lot of people are interested in that one, and that will be coming in the training following this one at 2 o'clock. So that does have separate call-in information, and that one's also on the ISO calendar. That one's KAISO BA resources only, so if you're external to KAISO BA, as in terms of your resource, then you may not need to join that one. So if you have a new project coming online, I just have a question here in the chat. If you have a new project coming online and you're starting test energy in mid-August, do you have to start with the current ADS UI or do we go straight to the new one? I would say that depends on your go-live date. If your go-live date is prior to October 1, then you may need to, but after October 1, you might be able to just do the new ADS UI. So that being said, we can follow up with that one as well. Because that one, or actually if you could submit, if you already have access to the CIDI or customer inquiry data system, I would submit a ticket for that to ask a question on that. Okay. So, and just to make sure, Harold, just so you don't think I forgot about your question, I'm actually going to cover that more towards the end. Actually, you know what, I'm going to cover it now. So the question is, if current digital certs work other than running ADS version 8, is there anything else that resources will need to do prior to October 1? I think you have 2 questions there. There's one related to certificates, and then 2, is there anything else that resources will need to do prior to October 1? And so 1, I would double check. I would actually in that stage double check that your certificates do work, and if you are implementing any changes version 8, that's your opportunity for testing. And then the other piece of it is there is going to be some data validation that you should do, and we're going to talk about the timeline here in a second, and we can talk about what that means. So, sorry, I changed my mind a little bit on there. So we're going to keep everybody on their toes. So with that, that is a good segue into the transition timeline. Maybe I'll take one pause here. Are there any questions, just kind of what we're planning to cover today or maybe what we covered in part 1.
So if you have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing pound 2, or feel free to send your question via chat. And Victor, let me know if anybody enters the key, please.
Absolutely. I don't see any questions coming in right now.
Okay, great. I cheat a little bit and I take my water breaks during those moments. So hopefully you guys don't mind. So let's talk a little bit about the transition timeline and some of the phases that are coming our way here. So the first phase, which we've already touched on once, is the market simulation phase, which is starting July 27th. And, you know, if this was an in-person class and there weren't 90 people on it, I'd probably ask you what day is the kickoff call, and hopefully somebody would answer July 23rd. So next week we have the kickoff call for that market simulation. And then on July 27th, Market Sim is going to start, and that will include like connectivity, and then we're also going to use the market simulation window of July 27th to September 4th to do those structured scenarios. If you're participating in market simulation and in the structured scenarios, that'll be occurring between July 27th and September 4th. If you need more details on that, I would join that kickoff call on how to stay informed during that time frame. And then September 4th, although market simulation is ending, the map stage environment will remain available until November 4th. So you'll still have some time in map stage to do some testing if you want, and that will include the old client as well. So you kind of do, you know, comparisons or whatnot. Now, the second phase is parallel operations, so September 1 to September 30th. And that'll be in the stage environment. I know many people have a lot of experience with map stage environment. There is another environment called the stage environment, which you may not have had experience with before. And what we'll be doing in that is, in this parallel operations timeframe, we'll be streaming production data. In this scenario, this is a good time to start validating data that's coming in. I also think it's a great opportunity for folks to, you know, again, check those provisioning of access, although I really encourage that in the map stage time frame. And then also validating not only their data, but also maybe the filters that they're going to be trying to set up when it comes to production. So that way they can figure out what they need, and then when we go into production, you can just create those filters accordingly. So let me just stop here because I want to see. Okay, I just wanted to make sure there were no other chat questions coming in. And note that when parallel operations ends on September 30th, the stage environment will remain available into November 4th. And that's just so you can continue to do maybe any activity you were doing in that. And then for production go live on October 1, we'll be moving into that production environment. So this is your normal environment that you interact with in production for real time. And just note, when we move into that production go live, the old ADS will remain available until February 1. It'll be decommissioned on February 1. And we're going to go into a table here so you can see all of that in a glance. But I'm covering this because these are the phases in which there might be testing going on, there's data validation going on, and this is going to be for the new UI and the API V8 release. Something to keep in mind is for that API V8 release, when that release is actually available in these time frames, so like July 27th, September 1st, and October 1st, this means V6 is being retired. So V8 comes live and V6 actually is retired. So with that, let's jump into this next slide. So this is a glance of cutover activities by date and environment. If you were in the CPG last week, we did cover these dates, and we had created this chart as a result to just make it a little more clear on what activities are happening when. So the green is when we have things being released or live, if you will. So for example, here on July 27th, we'll have the new ADS UI come live, we'll have the V8 being released, and we'll begin Market Sim. Now the orange is when things are being decommissioned. So here we've got ADS V6 being decommissioned on the 27th in map stage. V6 in stage will be decommissioned on the 1st of September, and then same thing for production, but on October 1st, we'll have the V6 retire. The ADS client itself, which is the current ADS that you're operating on in map stage, it'll be retired on the 4th of November. Same for the stage environment. So in both cases, those will be November 4th. And then the production one, as I mentioned before, is February 1st. One other thing I'd also like to just touch on is that if you want more information as it relates to the actual transition itself, so, Harold, for your question, you might want to actually refer to those activities as well, just to double check there's not something you might need to participate in or do. I would check with that recording to see what all the transition activities that are related. We'll cover a little bit more in today's, but that's a really good resource for that. Okay, so now let's actually jump into the ADS. So I did get a question about the CPG. Actually, Emmy, are you talking about, oh, sorry. Okay, so are you talking about today's slides or the slides from the CPG last week? Well, she's answering. I am going to just give a little summary here. So again, today we're going to talk about, or now we're actually going to jump into the overview of what changes are coming. Today's slides, I'm just going to actually answer. So today's slides, I'm not sure if they're posted yet. They're in the process of being posted, but we will definitely post them today, and so they should be available, and then we'll post the recording in about a week to 2 weeks. If you're looking for the CPG ones, they're under the Stay Informed meetings and events, customer partnership group, and we can provide that link as well once you get these slides. Okay, so let's jump into the actual changes, what you're probably here for today. So the first one we're going to talk about is the ones related to the requirement 6.2, or related to managing your flex ramp modifications. The requirement here was adding a RTD and FMM flex ramp up or flex ramp down column in the resource data grid for the real-time and 15-minute market. This is applicable to the generation resources as well as the tie-gen resources or tie generator resources. Here you can see in the screenshot there's new columns. So here I have RTD FRD and RTD FRU, and you'll see in another screenshot here shortly that there's similar columns for FMM as well. So there will be an FMM FRD and an FMM FRU. That's not enough acronyms for you. If you have more questions related to the actual FRD or FRU or flex ramp product, if you will, refer to the market operations BPM. That's where it talks about that. For those of you who have already been receiving awards for this, then you'll know that you were probably looking that up some other way, CMRI perhaps, and then now you'll be seeing it in ADS. If you registered for Market Sim and you're participating, you'll be validating this, viewing this data, or connecting and being able to see the columns and whatnot, part of the structured scenario. And then just another note here that the data is supported in the new ADS UI as well as the V8 API. Okay. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move to the next part of the requirement, 6.2. So this one's related to displaying the FMM or 15-minute market energy dispatches. as well as the bid type in the 15-minute displays. This is applicable to intertie resources. There's an additional alarm pop-up notification added to that. And then this data will be coming to ADS from the market as well. Here you'll see an example of, let me see if I can this one looks a little tiny, and I might as well practice zooming a little bit. So here you'll see there are some columns, FMM dispatch energy as well as resource bid option, and then the start and end time associated with that. So currently today, you might be looking at that data in CMRI, and now you will be able to see that data in ADS as well. So similarly, if you registered for Market Sim, you will validate viewing this data as part of the scenario, and then data supported in the new UI as well as the V8 API. Okay. So I'm going to take a pause there. Are there any questions related to the requirement 6.2 and changes coming with that?
So again, verbal questions, you can raise your hand by pressing #2. Victor, let me know if anybody enters the queue, please.
I don't see any questions coming in at this time.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the next one I'm going to talk about is requirement 6.3, so managing the non-spin economic dispatch. So first, let's take a minute and talk about the CAISO BA market functionality and some of the current things we have going on related to that before these changes go in. So real-time contingency dispatch, or RTCD, that is a mode of RTD, or the real-time dispatch, that might be used by our generation desk when a transmission or generation contingency occurs. And it'll include the contingency-only operating reserves, such as non-spin and spinning reserves. So for those of you who participate in the ancillary service market, and this is just the definition itself from the BPM. So there's a BPM definitions and acronyms, and so you can find this definition there too if you wanted to reread what an RTCD is. But again, this is a tool used by the CAISO VA in order to basically dispatch their contingency-only operating reserves in the event of a transmission or generation contingency. So currently, during the use of this mode, if non-spin is included, all the non-spin that are qualified and have awards are flagged in as part of this. And so when we move into talking about what is new coming in, it is a change in the market functionality of RTCD. So RTCD, or the contingency dispatch, will run with economic optimization for the non-spin if the non-spin is selected. So currently, if they select it, it does all the non-spin that is qualified and with an award. And the change is that it can run an economic optimization for this. So this will be non-spin qualified resources, which are offline with non-spin awards. And then additionally, economic dispatch for resource capacity, which is included in the bid, will be included in the optimization. So just something to note there. The market, so here, this is going to be a change as well. So the market's immediately going to broadcast the startups that come out of this, which are committed. And then ADS is going to process that and display the startup instructions through the commitment batch type. So while ADS doesn't have a direct visible impact, meaning there's no new columns or no new grids, what does happen is you can get this at any time. So previously, you could get startups that are coming from the RTCD. It would go with the RTPD time frame, or that 15-minute time frame or interval, and now that's going to be immediately broadcast once it's completed. So It doesn't have a direct visible UI impact, but it will impact the timing. So maybe for those of you with the API, you might want to consider that piece of it in your API and the timing in which, you know, if you have any things that have timed checks or whatnot. Okay. So to kind of summarize with that, the RTCD will now have an economic optimization aspect to it when it comes to the non-spin ancillary service awards. And this is really only applicable to resources which are qualified for non-spin and have non-spin awards and are offline. So that means they're not already dispatched. And then for those of you who are not familiar, non-spin is resources which can provide reserves that might be offline but can get online in 10 minutes. So this piece of it will now be able to include an economic optimization piece, and then they will immediately broadcast startups which are committed, and so this is a change in the timing as it relates to coming to ADS. Okay. So the next piece that I'm going to talk about is the unannounced ancillary service testing, which is requirement 6.4. So initiating the unannounced ancillary service testing for CAISO BA resources. So this is another piece. And if it wasn't clear on the non-spin side, that is CAISO BA because the RTCD is a CAISO BA tool. So again, moving into the unannounced ancillary service testing, this is applicable to CAISO BA resources as far as initiating an unannounced AS test. Currently today, resources who have spin or non-spin awards are at potential, they do have the potential to be called on for an unannounced AS test. The process you might be familiar with is part of this resource performance verification procedure, or operating procedure 5370. If you want to view that one, here it is. For those of you who are SCs, the phone call might sound something like, you know, this California ISO calling for an ancillary service test starting now for resource X, this time to this time, you know, so something like that. So you'll get a phone call saying you're getting called on for an unannounced ancillary service test, and we're basically simulating, you know, that you're being dispatched and you have to meet that dispatch as part of the test. And when I say simulating, I mean more so kind of like RTCD, if you were to get dispatched via RTCD, except for we're testing to make sure you can actually meet those requirements. And so, again, that's part of this process you might be familiar with in OP 5370, which is a currently verbal process. This does not impact EIM since this is CAISO BA resources, but one thing to note is the columns will be visible to folks who are outside of the CAISO BA. And so, you know, in the resource data grid, these columns can be unchecked or, you know, basically taken out to remove from your view. And I'm going to go to the next slide here. So when we're initiating, so what we're doing actually, so the change here in the process is moving, we're going to be moving the unannounced ancillary service testing. There's going to be an option to initiate that in the market as an AS test instruction. So that's going to be a change that now you can receive that AS test in ADS. And this is, again, going to be applicable for resources who are who have spin or non-spin awards. Some details around the ADS side of this is it is going to be a new batch type. So AS test is going to be a new batch type. It's going to include an alarm and a pop-up message. So last time in part 1, in terms of the UI, we talked about the audio alarms as well as the white pop-up messages. So AS tests will be included in that. You'll have the new columns in the resource data grid. So you can see here a little snippet of the columns. So we have the AS test constraint megawatt, start and end time, as well as the reason. And this will be received by the SC with a designated resource. So not everybody will see it. The people who have access to that, viewing that resource, will see the AS test. The other thing here, as I said, it was a new batch type or AS test, so you will see an additional column in the batch area or batch grid of the display. Sorry, losing my words here. And so here you'll see there might be an active AS test and the time that it was sent or time it was received at the application side. This is what it will look like. And you, again, have one of those little filter check boxes to narrow down the resources in the grid below in terms of the resource data grid. Okay, so I'm actually going to, let me just double check, and I'm actually going to zoom out of my own. Oops, I zoomed too far for myself. Okay. So I'm going to take a pause here because I know this one is a change in process. Is there any questions related to AS testing and receiving that AS test via the market and ADS?
You can enter the queue by pressing #2.
Do you have one question here? I call it, please state your name and question.
Hello, this is Dennis Sismayet, Northern California Power Agency. How much of a lead time will we get on these unannounced AS tests before we have to actually start the unit?
Typically, they begin right away because the idea is that you're simulating if you were to get dispatched in real time, and like as part of a contingency dispatch. So once it arrives in ADS, then you're, jumping into meeting your spin or non-spin dispatch.
Because currently when we get that phone call from the Cal ISO, they will typically say the test will start as soon as I hang up. So there's a little bit of lead time there. I was hoping that we'll get the same consideration on this new ADS system.
So I believe the answer to that would be when it is received on the ADS application, but we can double check that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And just to kind of clarify too, I would believe it will be at the start time that is posted in this, but we'll double check that receive time versus the start time.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Victor, do we have any other questions in the queue?
There are no other questions at this time.
Okay. Okay, so let me move into, so I did see a question in the chat saying I have the DOT conference at 2 p.m. Will we finish this conference on time to be able to log into the next class? And you are in luck because I am the person delivering that class. So if we run a couple minutes late on this one, I'm your gal. So I will also be running a couple minutes late so we can transfer over together. So let's move into these other ADS changes. I'm not going to spend as much time on these as some of these are more, I won't call them minor things, but I felt the other ones were a little more pertinent to spend more time on. So the first one is the requirement 6.5 or managing exceptional dispatches. The key here for those of you who have recognized when you get an ED entry and you may receive two, these duplicate ED entries will be removed. So usually there's 2 line items and you don't need to when they have all the same information. So these duplicate ED entries will be removed. It'll be a single ED entry. The second piece here, managing your DOT and SEP values, so that's requirement 6.6. This is giving you the ability or adding new columns for the previous SEP and then the real-time SEP delta. So if you have supplemental data, if you use that column today, you might look at that column. Now you're going to have a previous SEP. So what was my SEP in the last run? And then my SEP component, my supplemental component. And then you'll have the existing column, which is supplement. And then you'll have the calculation of the difference between the two. So the difference between my last SEP component and my current SEP component, and what's the difference between those two, okay? And then the third piece here, managing the DOT value acceptance or variation, and this is in reference to the hourly pre-dispatch and managing that previous accept DOT. So previously, it did not always account for manual intervention from the interchange scheduler. So let's just do a quick little example here that if you received a house forward of 20 megawatts and at T-minus 50, you know, as a scheduling coordinator, you maybe called the interchange scheduler to ask them to accept the word at a partial amount of 8 megawatts, so partialing the word at 8 megawatts. So they make the adjustment to 8 megawatts. The previous DOT will now show up as 8 megawatts in the next task run. So you'll have, you know, the accept DOT and then the previous accept DOT with the adjusted manual intervention. Okay. So I'm just going to touch on this for anybody who is just was curious about the DOTP clarification and wondering if they should be joining that one at 2 o'clock. So the operating instructions of the DOTP clarification project, this is for resources within CAISO BA. So the CAISO BA for EIR resources or eligible intermittent resources can receive operating instructions. And we're actually going to talk about that in the next class, but this change will be implemented as part of that project, so we'll cover that in that training. There will, however, for those of you who are not really impacted by this, there are going to be some new columns which are going to be in the batch grid as well as the resource data grid. For those who are going to be impacted, there's going to be a new batch type for operating instruction, which includes, you know, the flashing, the alarm, and the notification. But again, this is for CAISO BAA resources and actually EIRs. And so that'll be in the operating instruction column. So this doesn't impact EIM as they do not use this feature, but the columns will be visible to them, and in the resource data grid, they can uncheck those to take them out of their view. So and you'll actually see what the new columns look like a little bit in one of the future slides. So really quick to touch on, I just want to make sure everybody got a chance to view before it actually comes out, that, you know, we talked about the different batch types that are going to be added as part of these new changes of the ADS replacement project as well as the DOTP project. And this includes like the operating instructions here. You'll see there's the FMM energy, the 5-minute FR flex ramp, and I think there was one more, the AS test. So the AS test here. So just be aware that this is something that, you know, you'll have to take a look at and play around with in terms of managing your audio alarms. I'm also going to put a little plug reminder here that when you want to mute all sound, you will have to do something similar to today where you basically you'll have to mute the sound, but you also have to uncheck the play audio alarm continuously, okay? And then this last column here is showing the pop-up alert. So if you don't want to see the pop-ups, maybe you are always looking at it and you don't really need to see the 5-minute DOT pop-up every time, then maybe you uncheck that one or something like that as an example. Okay, so the new batch grid, this is what it's going to appear as with the new features or changes. The first one I'll point out here is the AS test. So we talked about unannounced AS tests, and those will be part of the new batch type. And then you'll have operating instructions, which if you're interested in the operating instruction as it relates to the EIR resources, then join in on the DOTT call next at 2 o'clock. And then the FMM Energy Awards for those interties, you know, there's a slight change to this piece as well, so it'll be coming with that. And then the FR or the Flex Ramp product for the RTD, that'll be here, okay? So there are some batch grid changes in which those will be coming through, and this will be in the new UI. So we didn't get to see that in the last training, so giving you a peek at that in this training. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about some reminders when you get a chance to log into the new ADS UI. So we're going to suggest, again, Chrome and Edge with Chromium. It's not in scope to support Internet Explorer. So for those of you who are migrating over to Edge, this will work with the Edge with Chromium, and then we recommend Chrome as well. It'll be accessible from the market participant portal, and when you go to the market participant portal in each environment, so for example, when we jump into Market Sim, then you'll go to the Market Sim MPP, and that will have a new ADS icon. So before you had that desktop application, and now it'll be accessible from market participant portal instead. Now it is still a certificate-based login. There's going to be one active session allowed per user certificate environment combo, so just keep that piece in mind as well. And then you'll want to work with your user access administrator at your organization who provisions the access itself. So if you participate in one of these future phases, Market Sim or Parallel Ops, you're not viewing the data that you expect to be viewing, the first thing you should check is your permissions or your provisioning with your user access administrator. If your certificate is expiring soon, so if you get one of those emails that says, hey, your certificate is expiring soon, please renew it, ensure to renew this so that you can participate in any activities that you might be scheduled to participate in. If your certificate expires, you'll have to go through the renew process, but keep an eye out for that email as if you do get a reminder that is expiring. If you don't get a reminder, you may want to check with your user access administrator as they may have set it up with their emails. Just kind of depends on your organization's process. So again, that permissions and what resources you have access to are with your user access administrator. If you're at the resource level, you'll want to check with your FC or scheduling coordinator. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about troubleshooting when you do get to log in. So you'll want to check with your UAA, as I mentioned, if you're having some issues, so your user access administrator. If you don't know who your UAA is, you can call the CAISO service desk and they can help you find out who that is. If you're disconnecting or unable to reconnect, this is kind of in general, right? If you're having system issues not related to your certificate expiring or not having the right permissions, if you're just experiencing the system issue, you can call the service desk and maybe check for any market notifications that say the system is down. In general, clearing your cache and restarting your browser, that's always a good one for most applications as well. So opening a new ADS session and receiving, if you get a notification that says you already have a session established or you already have another login, then try clearing your cache and restarting your browser. If you're not seeing a change or a new feature after there's a patch or release note provided, then, so let's say you get a notification from our customer service team saying, hey, we implemented this change, and you're not seeing it, again, you should kind of restart your browser, clear that cache to look for that. The other thing is check your browser and settings. So let's say you're not getting a pop-up that you were expecting to get, or you're not seeing the display correctly, it looks all jumbled. You might want to check which browser you're in, and you might want to check the settings that are in there, okay? So I spend too much time, I'm not going to pause for questions on that. Let's see. So in this one thing that might be, or that is changing with this is the ability to get a pop-up of the application itself outside of the application. So in the new ADS UI, it's possible to receive a notification outside of the application. However, it's going to look a little more like a pop-up in the lower right-hand corner. For those of you who have Outlook, and I think most people tend to have this, where you get the pop-up when you get a new email or something, there's a similar notification for ADS in Windows. So again, think kind of like those Outlook pop-ups, but they look more like the ADS application. To enable this, the user is actually going to have to tell the ADS application that it's okay for Windows to send those notifications if you want them. So let's talk a little bit about what that looks like. So here, enabling it in Chrome when you're launching the application, you'll see you get a little pop-up, and it'll ask you, do you want to allow the ADS application to show notifications? And you would hit allow if you do want to receive those notifications. It'll look like this. If you want to see the notifications, that's what it will look like. And then if you want to disable those, you'll have to go into your settings. So this is actually an example with the Edge with Chromium for those of you who are migrating over to Chromium or Edge, and that's what it looks like. It'll pop up at the bottom of the application asking you if you want to allow for notifications. You're more than welcome to block them as well if you don't. I know some people just have their application sitting on one computer, so that's really a preference thing. So to disable these pop-up notifications, navigate to the settings and edit in the manage permissions. This is just an example of what it looks like in Edge with Chromium. And Chrome actually looks very similar, where you can look for that little settings wheel when you get the notification. And if you might get an option to turn it off directly in that notification, but again, you can go to the browser settings and manage the permissions or notifications within the browser. So I would work with your IT group if you're not sure how to do that, but this is just to help set that up. So general tips when using the UI, and just some reminders, when you're logging in, it's probably good to log in each shift and start a new session, just because it does help keep that kind of freshness to it, although it's not planned for it to time out, so you technically should be okay. This is just coming from a person who likes to refresh my stuff a lot. And then I would just recommend that you load your desired profile. You never know what the previous person left you if you are on shift change. And you'll use that configurations button if you wanted to load a different profile that you've saved. To view it in full screen, this is just how to view it in full screen if you're in the Chrome browser. We talked about the turning on Windows notifications to get that little pop-up on the side. And then in terms of managing the audio alerts in ADS, just setting a little reminder here, because I actually also ran into this when I was doing my own training development here. Remember to update the settings. You'll click the little pencil icon, and just remember that when you change the settings, to hit update, and then some directions on how to manage those alarms, and just a reminder if you do want to mute the sound completely, how to do that, okay? I know you're not going to remember that until you're actually in the application, so that's why I'm providing it in the slides as reminders. So at a high level, We talked about what's coming in terms of timeline and changes. And then we walked through the general set of changes that's coming with the ADS replacement, like flex ramp and up and down awards, being able to view those now, the FMM schedules for the interties, non-spin economic dispatch changes and that being optimized in the market now, as well as that unannounced AS testing and that being initiated through the market and ADS. And we did have that follow-up question on that to come back to. Okay, so just really quick, let's talk about next steps. We're probably going to run a minute or two over here. So we'll continue attending. So you should continue attending the release user group. We just had one this last Tuesday. You can review that for any updates as well. Review the market sim scenarios and prepare for the structured testing for those of you who are signed up for market sim. Again, participating in market sim on the 27th. We're starting the 27th through September, or through, I think, September 4th, and then testing and training. So just make sure you're getting your testing and training done throughout. You know, the July timeframe is really more for the training, but then as you move into August and September, some of that validation and testing. Okay, so here's a snapshot of the RUG slide, so I'm not going to go through it. You can check in with the RUG if you have questions. And then we're going to talk about the DOT tariff clarification here in a minute, and when I jump over to the other WebEx. And then here's the information for that if you're interested. One other comment here with the IDS, or intertie deviation settlement, for those of you who are following it, was announced that it is delayed and it's going to become an independent project. So the training for this has also been pushed to September 29th, and that will include the ADS changes, such as viewing the SC accepted value and the difference between the two, between the HAS schedule and the accepted value as part of that piece. Okay, so here's the online references for those of you who, once we post the slide set, if you need access to certain things, you'll be able to use this as a resource. There's lots of opportunity to learn more about what's happening with this or stay up to date. Again, the release user group is ongoing, and actually so is the technical user group. So if you're an API person, highly recommend joining in on the technical user group, okay? And then a lot of the stuff that's changing, if you need more information just in terms of what those things are, like the products themselves, then check out the two market VPNs for that. Okay, so if you need anything in terms of what was presented today, you can send us emails at customerreadiness@kaiso.com. I'll be sending out a survey on this, so please do respond to that so we can improve our training. And with that, sorry I didn't actually have much time for questions, but again, please feel free to email us and let us know what questions you have as it relates to the training. And I did take note of a couple of the questions we got today. So with that, I will open it up one last time, but I do have to jump off here in a minute to go over to the DOTT training.
And once again, to ask a question, pressing #2 on your telephone. I don't see any questions coming in at this time.
Okay, awesome. So thank you guys so much for joining in. And then for those of you who are invested into the DOTT clarification project, join me on the next call. Thanks so much, everyone.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.